Listening to me talk about some course design things. So I'm going to kind of walk through a little bit of first just giving you a few definitions of things. So we'll talk about, what do we see as a definition of flipped course, and then just explain a little bit about my class. I know none of you are hydrogeologists, so give you an understanding of what that course is, so that then I can really walk you through the design and implementation process. So things that you could take and utilize in your own courses. And then the last thing I'll look at are some of the ways that I've been evaluating and some research areas that have kind of been built on. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that oftentimes what we do with course design can actually lend itself to publications, conference presentations, all of those types of things as well. All right, so the first question is, what does it mean to be flipped? So this is a presentation about flip, but that means you guys are going to work together in pairs. So what I'd like you to do is find a pair either nearby or free to move around. And between the two of you, see if you can come up with a definition of what you think a flipped classroom is, or a description of what that would look like for your field. So go ahead, start talking.
How about you?
I would think doing some prerequisites.
Hey, what are some things? Yeah, great.
Talking
So,
about how some of this shows up.
yeah, fantastic.
So yeah, we're just group therapy and simplifying.
Yeah, so you already kind of inherently have some things that could lend
But we
that way.
definitely want to learn how to maybe push that a little bit.
Yep,
more.
yeah,
Some of the other
absolutely,
classes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. So, hi, how are you ladies doing? Good. So what are some ideas you have for flipped classroom?
I'm just
Not sure,
guessing.
just guessing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That flips the role of me as a teacher and my students.
Yeah, sort of flipping the role of teacher and student in some instances, absolutely. And I think we all know from teaching ourselves, if we are teaching something, we know it pretty well. And so, encouraging the students to work together and teach themselves and each other helps with that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Encourage the students.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and I do a lot of just what we're doing now, where, okay, talk about this, and then I walk around and see, okay, what are you guys talking about? What do you think? And correcting where there's problems. So, yeah, great. How are you guys doing back here?
We're rocking and rolling.
Yeah.
We're both like in humanities, so it's a challenge in humanities for flipped classes.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
The concept of when you put the lecture online and then you stop the lecture every 10 minutes and give them a quiz to make sure they're actually listening. But then there are no real problem sets to work through in humanities, right? Like proofs or 4 or 5 algebraic, whatever. And so, but there are ways you can kind of
absolutely.
adapt it. He was talking about giving them documents to work through after, in class instead of on home, and then, for it's essentially they have to do the reading outside of class.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
What are the things?
So how do you get them to do that? That's the trick.
It's always the trick.
Yep.
We're professors, since we were good at school. We did the reading.
Exactly.
One thing that I've seen in history is the incorporation of the concept of history labs. So if you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, it's not really flipping, of course, but Mondays and Wednesdays will be traditional lecture. and then on Fridays you'll have problem solving, document analysis, and engaging with primary sources in sort of a lab type environment. It's also heavily discussion based.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, I am interested in kind of like a partial flip, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because I'm at the stage where I've been teaching here now for about 10 years, and I want to do some things differently. And my biggest challenge is a matter of covering the material.
Yeah.
I teach a course 1865 or 1877 to the present, and I want to get up to September the 11th.
Yep.
But I want to be looking for what people are here.
Yeah.
And a lot of class time is explaining assignments, and students have questions about what are you looking for in your essay, and things like that. So it's about how you manage that time.
Yeah, and that's so. Hopefully, I'll talk a little bit about some of that because I think even like I'm not having them do any of the math stuff before class. It's really about learning the basic concepts and reading and terminology, and so I think there's a lot of applicability to fields that is the main focus. So, yeah, great.
Cool.
All right, so let's all come back together now for a few minutes. I walked around and got a chance to hear some of your discussions. Anybody want to be brave and share something they came up with? No, all terrified this morning? Just like my class. Great, Gabriel.
We were just talking about how students, when George and I both put discussion questions and things online to have students sort of begin thinking about the material before they come into the class, and how that has helped with class discussions and encouraging students to talk when they come into class.
Yeah, so in classes where you have discussions, trying to put something online where they've got to type up answers or use a discussion board ahead of time so that they're already prepared and ready to talk about things in class. Yeah, great. Anything?
And the fact that it probably encourages better reading of the material.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so encouraging more reading of the material if they have to physically sit down and type up a well thought out response. Yeah, good.
I think what I'm hoping for is that you'll, help us, teach the students how to be more, take more ownership for their learning. And then I'm hoping with the flip that sometimes when you have to be the teacher, it really forces you to learn the material, right? And so I'm hoping with the flip that this actually makes students kind of co-teachers, if you will, in the classroom.
Yeah, so two really big things there, thinking about flipping as far as now the students are co-teaching and then how to keep them engaged and things like that. So yeah, great. And I heard some other really great discussions and responses as we went around.
We think that at some level all of us are flipping a little bit because we have, activities built, case studies, clinical scenarios. It's just this idea of the class is not, I guess, what the flipping people would characterize as totally flipping the course.
Yeah, and so that's a great point, this idea of you don't have to go completely all the way flipped. There are a lot of activities, and if you do want to go all the way flipped, there's probably a lot of things you're already doing that are partway there, and so it's not something where you have to totally start from scratch and redo everything. You still have pieces of that there. And so it's really about what are the baseline knowledge things that you need those students to know before they come to class to do some kind of activity. And Gray gave me this great analogy when I was doing things, that it's sort of like learning to drive a car, right? So if you stick somebody in a car who's never even seen a car, has no idea what these pedals are for, what this steering, do they even know which seat to get in? Going to be a problem, right? They have to at least know the basics of, okay, this is the chair you sit in, these are what these two pedals do, right? This is your steering wheel. That's what they're really getting out of class. They're not, and I think it's important from a student perspective, sometimes there's this fear of, well, I'm not going to know all this stuff, this is really, really complicated. Well, no, I don't expect you to know it all, I expect you to know some basic terminology. And so trying to use those types of analogies with the students to encourage them that, it's okay, I'm not expecting you to come in as an expert, but I am expecting you to come in to, know what a steering wheel and a brake and gas pedal are, right? So, and then the other side of that, of course, is taking those pieces and how do we apply and develop those in the classroom, right? So we want them to come in with the baseline knowledge. then how do we actually teach them to drive the car while we're in the class? And that's really the tricky part, is trying to figure out how do I isolate these things, but then put them back together so that they're really building on this material. So my particular course, just to kind of let you know what the perspective is, it's a combination, it's hydrogeology, lecture, and lab. And so we have 3 hours of lecture, 3 hours of lab each week is sort of how it's scheduled out. It is an undergraduate course, but it's a 4,000 level, so it's a senior level course. It's typically one we try and encourage them to take as late as possible in their geology degree. All of our geology majors are required to take it, but I also typically every class will have a handful of either biology or chemistry or geography majors that want a little bit more information about water and water movement. Now, the one thing that's unique about my particular class relative to maybe some other institutions is I have to talk about the basics of this is how water moves through the subsurface, these are the things we're dealing with, but then I also have to cover all of and then we pollute the water, and this is how that occurs and what those happens. There are a number of institutions that break those into 2 classes. We do not do that, and from a licensure standpoint for geology, they really have to know some of those aspects. So I can't just totally leave it out of the course because it impacts those students that want to go on and work in the environmental or hydro field. And as I mentioned, and then it's a 4-credit course. Basically, they get 3 credits for lecture, 1 credit for lab. So when I traditionally taught the lecture and lab were my very first semester at Austin Peay, fall 2012.